This is the Truth Network.
Welcome to the Christian Car Guy Radio Show.
I say this calls for action, and now.
We had to hurry from the land we were slaves. So where it's free, culinarily. I'm eating a matzah.
And who doesn't love some good matzah? What's a matzah? Nothing. What's a matzah with you?
We had to hurry from the land we were slaves. So where it's free, culinarily. We're eating the matzah. And the Seder bread helps us tell our story. The Seder tonight. Seder tonight.
The mouth, the circle, and the covenant today on the Christian Car Guy Show. Right? Unveiling the mysteries of Passover through ancient Hebrew letters. And it is Passover tonight. Like, how cool is it? I think it's beyond cool that, the Jews would count Passover to start at twilight, right? When the sun starts to go down, that's when their day starts. And Passover this year will actually happen on a Sunday. How cool is that? And if you looked at the moon last night, you'll notice it's pretty full because it always comes. Passover does, as actually does Easter. But, the way our calendar works, we don't necessarily celebrate it the same way. But Passover, very significant to the idea that Palm Sunday is happening tomorrow for many of you. But, oh my goodness, what God is going to show us through this weekend as we get a chance to go worship in all sorts of different ways. But one of the ways that you can go do that is to go to a Passover dinner, which is called a Seder, if that's the word. So to give you some of the idea of the words that were just described in there, you heard him say that a Seder plate. Well, that plate that happens at the Passover supper, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, is got special things on it, like bitter herbs that remind you of the slavery, and it has the green vegetable. It has an egg that has to do with new life and the resurrection and all sorts of neat things, and it helps us tell our story. Okay, that's what they were singing there. This is Jewish people talking about their story, but talk about new life. It all is a picture of what Jesus would bring: the mouth, the circle, and the covenant. And so that is actually the Jewish group 613 that sings all that stuff, Bob. Pretty cool, right?
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Does this have anything to do with from where Easter eggs came from?
I hope so. I know that they have celebrated this for 3,337 years because God commanded it. This is the first feast that has been, celebrated. And it's been celebrated for 3,337 years since Moses, God instituted it through Moses and the law. So here's the deal. The idea of all that and the idea of coming to faith in Christ to some extent is liberty. And so the question today that I would love for you to call in and share is, how has God spoken over you that initiated your liberty? A word, or something that just touched your heart with a piece of scripture, or maybe it was music, or maybe it was your parents telling you the story of salvation Yeah, Bob?
Earlier, you were explaining the difference between freedom and liberty, and I'm still pondering on that.
But yeah, therein lies a giant question for everybody to ponder. And I pondered it this week a lot because, again, the Jews were set free from slavery, but Jesus was very clear in Isaiah 61 that he was going to provide liberty for the captives. And liberty is a significantly different word in Hebrew than is freedom. And I spent a lot of time pondering and thinking and looking at the different letters, but just to give you the very Reader's Digest version of that from my perspective of what the Hebrew would tell us, is that freedom is like you can do anything you want. You're not under authority of any kind. And so if you truly had freedom, you can go kill somebody, whatever you want to do, you're free. And you're not under any authority. That's freedom. But that doesn't work out so good, and that isn't what God necessarily had in mind. Because if that's what God had in mind, he just could have wiped out Pharaoh, whatever, and taken him out and put him wherever. But that isn't what he told Pharaoh. He said, I want you to let my people go that they may worship me in the desert. In other words, there was a purpose behind that freedom. And like William Wallace would say in his famous speech there in Braveheart, what will you do with that freedom? Well, hopefully you're going to become who you are. And the idea of liberty is actually sort of this flow and a sort of a process of you becoming who God intended you to be. And of course, a big part of that is actually accepting Pesach, accepting the covenant that he is providing with you. So we're going to talk about the mouth, the circle, and the covenant, all these things. That circle is very important to cars. Let me tell you, because it's our wheels. And there's a whole lot of stuff that you may think, what does this have to do with the Christian car guy? But therein lies the opportunity. And we do have a Seder tonight at my church, Kildee Church in Ramseur, and there are tickets right there at ChristianCarGuy.com. If you want to come, join us. We would love for you to do that. We're going to go into a lot more detail on all this stuff. And how fun is that? But I would love to hear, really, call us, 866-348-7884. How did God give you a word that initiated your liberty, right? There was just something he spoke to you, okay? I can tell you my initial one. I can tell it very quick, that I was reading the Bible because I wanted to sell more cars, not because I wanted to get faith. I was reading it because I'd read Norman Vincent Peale's book on, how do you get positive thinking. Actually, I was listening to the tape set. And as I was reading through the Bible based on that piece of information, I came on the book of Job. And at the time, I was very, very angry with God because I was like, how could you do this to Job? How could you take out his family? How could you let these people annoy him for all these chapters to go on and on and on about his sin when clearly the poor guy, you did all this stuff, just, what is up with this? And I was getting angry and angry at God, and all of a sudden, God spoke to me. Here was the word, Robbie. Since you know everything that you think you know, why don't you make it snow? I'll be impressed. Bring in the tide one time, and then you can begin to tell me, what it is that I should or shouldn't be doing. In other words, as those words coming fresh out of the Bible hit Robbie's heart, I call it as a canonizing of the Bible, that there's this cannonball that's headed for your head. And at some point in time, it will humble you to realize that there is a God and I'm not him. It just... and that's
you
what
said that in my presence before, and it had a profound effect on me.
It had one on my brother. It had an effect on me forever. But therein lies the issue, is that humility. And so, they spent 400 years in slavery. And but God was speaking words over them in order to give them liberty, in order for them to become who they were supposed to be. And in my case, after I realized there was a God and I'm not him, I realized he had a really, really high standard, which I did not meet, and I needed a Savior desperately. And all of a sudden, I had a reason to read the New Testament because I was looking for, how do I get straight with this situation, right? And then you come across the story of the cross, which is what Passover was picturing, this picture that he was going to paint. And then Jesus, at the Last Supper, which was a Seder, it was a Passover meal. They were eating unleavened bread. And so the bread he broke that day was very much unleavened, which pictures this sinless idea. And if you think about it, leaven puffs up. And so when you heard him say they're taking the hamatz out of the matzah, matzah is unleavened bread and hamatz is yeast. And so when you get no yeast, you get no puffery. And so the idea of unleavened bread has to do with your testimony. And we'll get into that to a bit. But Jesus broke that bread, right, and offered people to eat it, which would unite you with Jesus, his communion. But then he took the cup, which is gigantic. If you go to a Jewish wedding ceremony, they're going to drink from this cup, right? The bride and the groom. And he's going to say, this is a new covenant, which has to do with marriage, which has to do with the word Pesach, in my blood, right? Which was that, again, this opportunity to be united with Christ, which is what meant everything to me, as I realized he would die for my sins. So we come back, need your calls, 866-348-7884.
You're listening to the Truth Network and truthnetwork.com.
Oh, what shall we do with the middle matzah? What shall we do with the middle matzah? What shall we do with the middle matzah? Early in the Seder. Hide it away, it's the afikomen. Hide it away, it's the afikomen. Hide it away, it's the afikomen. Early in the Seder. Oy vey, let's get some prizes. Oy vey, let's get some prizes. Oy vey, let's get some prizes later in the Seder. Soon may our freedom come to bring us liberty, peace, and fun. One day when the Pharaoh's outdone, he'll let my people go.
So they get liberty so they can have freedom, as we've been talking about today on the Christian Car Guy Show. You know, how has God spoken a word over you that created that liberty? 866-348-7884, 866-348-7884. Again, the Seder is a Passover supper dinner, and there they serve matzah. And he said, what are we going to do with the middle matzah? What are we going to do with the middle matzah? And so if you were to sit down at your plate at a Seder that's set out the way it's supposed to be, in my opinion, there would be 3 pieces of matzah there. And so there's one on the top, one on the bottom, and one in the middle. And early in the Seder, they break that middle piece of matzah. This is something the Jews do. This isn't something Christians initiated. Okay, I'm just telling you. And they take that middle matzah, and you might remember Jesus was on the cross he was the middleman, right? Between the 2 thieves. And they break the middle matzah, and then they hide it away as the afikomen, which means the best is yet to come. That's dessert, okay?
Save your fork.
Right. And the way we hide Easter eggs, they hide the afikomen. And when they say, oh, we get some prizes, in other words, the children are all excited because, you know, they get prizes, and that's going to happen tonight at our Seder, at our church, is I have prizes for the kids that are going to be there, because a Seder dinner is a family deal, and you bring the kids, and part of what they get to do is like an Easter egg hunt, only they're looking for the afikomen. Who are they looking for, Bob?
Looking for God.
They're looking for Jesus, right? You see, the middle matzah, it's been broken. It was Jesus. Now you take it and you put it in this actual afikomen bag, or they wrap it in a napkin, and then they go hide it. Where was Jesus for 3 days? He was hidden, right?
Wrapped.
Right. And right at this time of year, just saying, you know, he was wrapped. Exactly. He was wrapped, and there it is. So hide it away as an afikomen. So you see this picture of the liberty that this dinner is pointing to, an understanding. And you can't help but wonder, man, how do they not see that this, you know, we didn't come up, the Christians didn't give them this idea. They do it. They wrapped it, that middle matzah, in a napkin. You're exactly right. Just like Jesus was wrapped, and they hide it away, and then they find it, and they get prizes. Well, yeah, they do. Here's the prize. Newness of life, right? And if you believe that he was who he was, you get the whole deal. Is that not cool?
It's deep too, but you're explaining it very, very well, because somebody as dense as me, I'm actually picking up on most of it.
Yeah, well, God, he will make it available, like, you know, when the student's ready, the master will appear, kind of thing. Like when you really want to know, you know, what does that mean? And it's a lot of to do with why they tell the story every single year this time. Because the more you tell the story, the more questions you get. And that's why I love having you on, Bob, is you ask questions like, what does this mean? What is that? What is that about? And
well, I have to. The only dumb question is the one I don't ask.
Right. So when it comes to the matzah or the unleavened bread, okay, it's described in Deuteronomy as the bread of affliction. And the neat thing about that is not only is it holy because it's matzah, it's been wrung out, the blood's been wrung out of it. It's a really neat word, matzah in itself. But I'm not talking about that for a second. I want to talk about the word affliction. Now, interestingly, and I never would have thought of this, but the word affliction and testify, if you were to testify in court, in a Jewish court, you would use the same word as affliction. Now, how does that work? Let me explain it to you. I've had to think about this a lot and ponder it. And all of a sudden it came to me, and oh my goodness. You see, in order to have a testimony, which is what you do in court when you testify, you have to have a test. Right? And so this affliction, what appears to be affliction, is actually giving you a testimony. It may be good or it may be bad, but your life has a testimony. Everybody's watching you. When the fire happened at 109 New Pullet, right, Bob? Everybody was watching.
Oh, everybody was watching. They handed me a microphone and threw the camera in my face. And, what are you going to do, Bob? And there's 30 employees standing behind the camera. Yeah, what are you going to do, Bob? You know, because a lot of people were sure that I'd run, you know, be done. But
well, you were eating the bread of affliction, you see.
It was never an option to quit.
Right. But then God, what happened?
We prayed every day. We changed the way we did things. We were so blessed with weather. I mean, we had no building. This happened January 28th. We had no shop, warehouse, office, none of that. And we had a little concrete where we could kind of do things, but we just had to change everything, the way we did everything. But I think we did it as well or better than we had ever done it. And the biggest part of it is even I could see that Bob's plan was irrelevant. It was going to take a much bigger plan to get us through this. And so we leaned heavily on God and his leadership, and you know, that's all we had. Sometimes you don't realize that God's all you need until God's all you got. And we had to lean heavily. And people that didn't have strong belief developed a greater belief than they'd ever had. When it rains all night long and quits raining at 7:45, you do a day's work, and then it starts raining again at 5:15 or 5:30 that evening when you're ready to leave. You kind of say, I don't believe I did that, but I'm glad it happened like that. But we had the best weather. We had so many things that went absolutely
What
perfect.
did God speak over you in that bread of affliction? And that became a testimony. 866-348-7884. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Truth Network and truthnetwork.com.
Just lean to the left and we'll tell the tale of how we left Egypt. God split the sea and we walked across with no need for a ship.
But first, before we get to that, there's sons and questions for. Just when you think it's almost done, there's 3 hours more. There's 3 hours more.
For Pharaoh sent men after us, their lives would soon be lost. And we spill wine drops from our cups, 'cause freedom had a cost. 'Cause freedom had a cost. So every year we celebrate our freedom with a smile. With Moses and Ramses too. Yocheved the Levite.
Oh, wait, that song's amazing.
They're gifted, right? That's 613, the Jewish group, and they're giving you the idea of what happens at a Seder, of telling that story, of telling yours, Tony. It's literally a testimony, as is the bread of affliction. It's in your story, and I assure you that whether or not you ever speak it, people see it, especially the parts of deep affliction, of things like that again, you think about the story that we're talking about here. These people were in slavery for 400 years. I mean, it's not like they had a little, no, 400. I mean, that's longer than our country's been a country. They were in slavery, and bitter slavery at the end, as they were throwing their kids in the Nile, right? I mean, you couldn't even have a child without worrying about whether or not, it was crocodile bait, whatever. It's like, man, that's affliction. And God heard all that. But you can't help but wonder what's going on. And the more I've thought about it, is, man, what was going on is the same thing that probably has gone on in your life. God has to get your attention, that it has to do with humility, which is the idea of unleavened bread. Is unleavened bread has no yeast. And what the pains that they go to, the Jewish people do, in order to make matzah. I was telling Bob, and Tammy and I, we've been making it for 2 days for the Seder that we have coming up, tonight. And in order to make it right, from our perspective, we grind the flour, and we grind whole wheat berries. So yes, it's got all the chaff, it's whole grain as it can be. And then you just add a little bit of water. Well, you only have 7 minutes if you're going to make your matzah kosher, from the time the water touches the dough until it hits the oven, because, again, it has to have no yeast. It has no fermentation whatsoever. And so you got 7 minutes from the point the water touches the flour that you push it down. And you talk about afflicting some dough. I mean, you afflict it with a rolling pin, and then you pierce it with a fork all over the place. I mean, it's afflicted. And those piercings, yes, it's very much. And then, you throw it in the oven at 500 degrees. And believe me, the water is wrung out of it, which is what matzah has the idea of wringing out. And it's picturing this that you have been through in your life. And I would love to hear it. 866-348-7884, because at some point in time, right, it gets your attention. Bob went through something I can never think of, but I know I went through losing the dealership, and I went through, cancer, and I went through, being hit by the Jeep. And anybody who knows my life knows that there were plenty of tests in order to create this testimony, right? And it was all a matter of, you can say, but interestingly, even after 400 years of slavery, it still took them 40 years in the wilderness to get Egypt out of the Israelites, right?
It's a whole lot for me to talk about sometimes, but the things that happened when Rob passed, and the things we went through, and the way we were able to move forward after that, and the way we were able to make some positives come from what had happened. And it was just one of the toughest times, but it was another tragedy turned into a great experience. And it's hard to look at your son's death as a great experience, but the help I got from God, family, friends, to move through this with some sort of, I guess grace, maybe.
Yeah, that's a good word.
We moved through it, and we moved forward. And Lori and I were closer than ever during that period of our life. And I'm so glad I had her to walk that mile with. And, it was just, I don't know, it's hard to describe what all we went through, but we went forward. And we kept going forward, and we were able to make some positive things happen. And it was a very, very spiritual part of my life. That was a time that, once again, like in the fire, I didn't have the strength. I didn't have the knowledge of what I needed to do. I had to depend on God because, it was what I had. And he walked me through that, kept me alive. And I've said it before, so many of people that were really close to me were sure that I would take my life when Rob passed. But, that didn't happen. We're still here. And I've just realized that as fast as time is going by, he and I will be back together in no time. And until we are, thank you, God, for keeping me here and giving me a purpose.
Yeah, one of the neatest passages in the Bible for me this time of year is Exodus 6 through 8. Because God tells them, they've been in slavery for 400 years. And Moses has been told that they're not listening to him, and Pharaoh ain't listening to him, and Moses is kind of like, man, now what? And God tells him, in no uncertain terms, between Exodus 6:6 and 6:8, there are 7 I will statements. I will take you out. I will rescue you. I will. And this is God. This isn't Moses. You got to do a bunch of stuff here. This is Moses. Listen to me. I will take you out. I will rescue you. I will redeem you. I will take you to be my people. I will take you into the promised land. I am going to I'm going to become a God to you, and I am going to give you a heritage. And that, in a way, is your own identity. In other words, when I think about what happened, Bob, it's part of the Bob process. It's like what's gone through my life. And like God knew that Robbie needed to go through this, and this in order to become who Robbie needs to become. And in your case, he apparently thought, well, this isn't what I originally had in mind. But here we go, and Bob's becoming Bob. And anybody that knows you well knows that that's a really, really neat friend that has the ability to talk to people that have gone through some horrible things that you didn't have that ability 12 years ago.
No, I was a very reactionary type person, and I don't know, it changed me. The fire changed me. Rob's death changed me. I would have never. I always thought I had advice for anybody, but as far as somebody trying to deal with the death of a child or drug addiction in their family or anything, I don't know that I would have tried to give them much advice on anything like that. But many, many, many people called and sought counsel from me, because of what I had been through. And even to this day, I still speak with people that have lost a child or are dealing with the drug addiction and trying to figure out the best plan. And I get to help. Not the volume of folks I did back a few years ago, but people still come.
Oh, yeah. It's 2 Corinthians chapter 1 comes to life in all our lives, right? The God of all comfort comforts us that we might comfort others with the comfort he comforted us with. In other words, and interestingly, that word is Noah, because Noah is named after the word comfort. And you spell that backwards in Hebrew and you get grace. And so as you were talking about, comfort and grace are very, very connected ideas. And Noah was saved by grace, right? He found grace in the Father's eyes. So were you, and so was I. But man, we need your calls. What's your story? 866-348-7884. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Truth Network and truthnetwork.com.
Oh yeah, you can sing, you can dine, having the 4 cups of wine. Ooh, eat my roar, dip parsley, now that the Jews are free.
What has God spoken over you to initiate your liberty today on the Christian Car Guy Show? As we're talking about Pesach or Passover, the 3 letters of Passover. But what you just heard, if you're not familiar with what he was saying, I love it. This is what he says: is, you can sing, which there's lots of singing at a Passover Seder. There are lots of beautiful songs, really neat ones, that have unbelievable spiritual meaning to them. You can dine, certainly because you're going to be eating the Paschal lamb, or in their case, they're going to be eating chicken. They won't eat lamb again until they eat it again in Jerusalem. And they have 4 cups of wine, right? Did you hear me? It says drinking those 4 cups of wine. Well, the 4 cups of wine are those 4 promises that are started out in in Exodus 6:6. I just told you, I will take you out. I will rescue you. I will redeem you, and I will take you to be my people. Those are promises. He's going to do it.
When you say take you out of captivity.
I'll take you out of bondage.
Okay.
He's not going to take. Well, he's going to take you out one way or the other. I'm just telling you. He's going to take you out on a date, or he's going to take you out.
I just want a little clarity, that's what I'm here for, clarity.
I love it, but and then he says, "Eat maror." Okay, well that means bitter herbs, and so they're going to eat horseradish. They're going to eat a green vegetable that's bitter, and the idea of that bondage that you've been in your life, which is called sin, and you have a Pharaoh in your life, whether you realize it or not. We all do. His name is Satan, and he, God would really like to have him let his people go, but it's not just like accepting Christ and all of a sudden you're free from sin. I don't know if you've experienced that, but you still have addictions. You still have all these things that you get an opportunity to seek God and to push back into those 4 promises. But if you try to fix those promises, those problems yourself, like addiction and rage and anger and all those things, again, he gave you those 4 promises. I will, because our humility is what's required. We got to go to the cross. We have to die to ourselves. That's the beauty of what's in that.
Just not your own understanding.
Well, there you go. There you go. And so what I actually started the show with, and I want to speak on for a minute here, is it says the mouth, the circle, and the covenant. And that spells that, in other words, what I said was unveiling the mystery of Passover through ancient Hebrew letters. Okay, so the word Passover that God used in writing out in the book of Exodus is pronounced Pesach if you were to say it in Hebrew. And it's just 3 letters. And that's where you get the word. You can hear it in Passover. You got the P and you got the S, and unfortunately, I don't have the CH sound at the end of it, which would be Pesach, but that's a critical thing. So just to give you these 3 letters, to give you a picture of what we're talking about, and the picture that God was going to paint. See, God is the most amazing artist of all time, and part of the way he painted it is through the Bible, and each single letter is a picture, especially in Hebrew, because it's a picture language. Okay, and so that first picture, that pei, is a mouth. It's actually sort of the face of God. And so when you think about that face, like God, he wants to shine his face upon you, just like it says in the Aaronic blessing. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you, lift his countenance upon you. Well, I got this granddaughter. Her name is Margie, and I was at her father's birthday party with her other grandfather this week. And Margie at this point in time is like 10 months old. And the other grandfather started to get her, he was doing all the thing I was doing, trying to get her to smile, right? He was clicking his mouth and going, and all the stuff that we do, grandfathers.
Yeah, we do act pretty silly in front of the grandkids.
And Margie's looking at him like, yeah, right. And then he starts to get in her face. Like when he gets up really close to her, she all of a sudden just lights up like a bulb, man. I was like, and I see this action. I'm like, look at that. The closer he gets to her, the more she smiles. And then she just lighten up as he gets right in her face. And then she takes his lip and goes, and now that's the most fun you ever saw in your life, right? And so, a little later, we actually went back to Mariah's at my daughter's house, and they were showing us some stuff. And so I said, I'm going to try that action with Margie, which was, by the way, my mother's name. It's precious to me that that's her name. So I start getting in her face, and it's exactly the same thing. She just starts smiling like you wouldn't believe. Well, that idea of God's face, if we really understood, if we could only understand, he would love to see us smile. As much as I want to see Margie smile, he would love for you to really smile, and to smile from a very deep place of total joy, which is that pay that's in Pesach. That's what he wants.
It's funny you're mentioning the grandbaby, because last Sunday we went to pick Haven up, and as soon as we pulled up and got out of the car, she was out on the porch jumping up and down and clapping and big old smile on her face. And
it warmed,
wow,
your heart just was melted, right?
Yeah, what a reward. It's just to have somebody that excited to see me. And, if we just look at it, God's always excited to see us, and
yeah, that's the deal. Always. And so that P, that pay, that beginning of the word Passover / Pesach, there you go. The second letter is a 0, it looks like, but it's actually called a Samic. And that's where you get the S sound in Pesach. And that 0 is literally, I'm telling you, it is the power that holds the planets up in the air. It's gravity to some extent, but it is also the power that holds your feet on the ground. But it's also the power that was the pillar of fire by night. And it's the idea of, and David, when he described this letter, said, my flesh trembles for fear of thee. In other words, this is a force that we can't even begin to get our mind around, that is God. It literally holds the planet up, or the planets up in the universe. But at the same time, he holds you in the palm of his hand. I mean, in a gentle, graceful, like, what?
It's a pretty big force to keep my feet on the ground most of the time. I mean, it's a lot. And
so when
I know I'm a challenge to be married to. Sometimes I'm a challenge to be friends with. Sometimes it's a challenge to even be in my presence. But that's a lot of force it takes to keep. Well,
he's got it.
Grounded.
He has all of that. And that I love the song "Stars" by I'm trying to think of the name of the group, but the same thing. If he can hold the stars in the sky, he can certainly hold my heart, and he does that. And that's that 0. It's also a wedding ring. Okay, that's that circle that you were wearing on your finger is the letter Samic, because it has everything to do with this idea of God giving you a big old hug, because he's supporting you and he loves you. And so the last letter, which to me is just absolutely spectacular, is that CH sound, which is called a het in Hebrew. And that is the marriage canopy. In other words, he is betrothing you. He's saying, let's get hitched. We're going to go to the marriage supper of the Lamb. And this is what it's going to look like. You're going to put blood on a cross over your door, right? That's Pesach, and the picture of what Jesus would do. So I hope you have an amazing Passover tonight. I hope you have an amazing Palm Sunday tomorrow as you head into Easter. Think about all these things, how God has given you liberty, right? Thank you, Bob,
Thanks for having me, brother, and thanks for taking time to explain it on a level where I can understand. I think it helps everybody out there. If you get it through to me,